There comes a time in the life of the soul when the battle within ceases to be a blind war. We begin to see, not with the eyes of judgment, but with the eyes of recognition, that which we once rejected, feared, or denied no longer lurks in the unconscious, pulling the strings of our fate. It is here, in this quiet clarity, that we witness the signs, the subtle marks of an inner turning. The shadow, as understood in depth psychology, refers to the aspects of the self that are hidden, denied, or disowned. These are the traits, emotions, desires, and memories that the conscious mind rejects or represses, often because they conflict with how we want to see ourselves or how we believe the world wants us to be. But the shadow does not vanish simply because we ignore it. On the contrary, it grows in influence the more we resist acknowledging it. It operates autonomously, slipping into our behaviors, reactions, and decisions without our awareness. It acts behind the curtain, drawing energy from suppression and invisibility, dictating parts of our lives while we remain convinced that we are in control. To say that the shadow dominates our energy is to say that we are unconsciously driven by forces we have not yet faced. These forces shape our relationships, fuel our compulsions, stir our fears, and distort our perception of reality. The first key idea that integration of the shadow does not mean the shadow disappears, but that it no longer acts unconsciously, points to the distinction between rejection and recognition. Many people believe that healing or growth requires the elimination of what is dark, flawed, or frightening within them. They imagine a self purified of anger, jealousy, cruelty, or shame, as though these elements can be surgically removed. But in psychological reality, wholeness does not come from amputating parts of ourselves. It comes from understanding and integrating them. Integration means bringing what is unconscious into conscious awareness. It means facing what we have long avoided and giving it a name, a voice, a form. It means turning toward the shadow rather than running from it. This process is neither quick nor easy. The shadow hides because it protects the aspects of ourselves we repress, are often linked to pain, humiliation, fear, or rejection, experiences we could not process when they first occurred. To bring them into the light now requires courage. It demands that we tolerate discomfort, ambiguity, and the shattering of long-held self-images. We must be willing to question the narrative that we are only our virtues, only our achievements, only our good intentions. We must allow ourselves to become more than what we thought we were. Integration means no longer projecting the disowned parts of ourselves onto others. It means seeing that what we hate in others may live within us, that what we envy in others may be a reflection of our own buried potential, that what we condemn may be what we fear in ourselves. When you begin this process, the shadow loses its unconscious hold. It no longer needs to erupt in moments of crisis or disguise itself in self-righteousness. It no longer sabotages our relationships or draws us into repetitive patterns. Its power diminishes because it is no longer hidden. Its autonomy dissolves as it is brought into the larger field of the self. We begin to recognize the patterns of the shadow when they arise. We notice the tightness in the body, the sudden emotional surge, the irrational response, and instead of acting from those impulses blindly, we pause, we reflect, we ask, what part of me is being activated right now? That moment of awareness interrupts the automaticity of the shadow. It transforms reaction into response. Importantly, integration does not make the shadow disappear. The elements that make up the shadow are not foreign to us. They are us. They are the parts we have not yet made peace with. They do not cease to exist because we have become aware of them. They continue to live within us, but in a different way. They become conscious partners in our psychic life. We begin to draw from them, not just darkness, but depth, not just chaos, but complexity. The very traits we once rejected can become sources of strength, creativity, and insight. Anger, when integrated, becomes clarity and boundary. Fear becomes discernment. Envy becomes motivation. The shadow contains not only our wounds, but our unrealized gifts. Energy that was once used to deny or suppress these aspects of ourselves becomes available for other uses. When we repress, we use enormous psychic effort to keep things out of awareness. This effort is exhausting. It creates inner conflict, emotional reactivity, and psychological fragmentation. But when we integrate, that energy is no longer split. It flows more freely. We feel more whole, more grounded, more authentic. The self is no longer at war with itself. And this shift is not just emotional or mental, it is energetic. We feel it in the body. We feel less tension, less compulsion, less urgency to control. We feel more space within ourselves, more calm, more presence. This is the essence of the first key point. Integration of the shadow is not about perfection. It is not about becoming pure or virtuous in some absolute sense. It is about becoming conscious. It is about seeing the truth of who we are in all its messiness, contradiction, and beauty. The shadow does not vanish like a ghost. Exposed to sunlight, it becomes known, and in being known, it is transformed. Its power no longer comes from secrecy, but from the richness it adds to our inner life. We do not transcend the shadow, we befriend it. We do not eliminate our darkness, we learn how to walk with it, speak with it, and understand what it has been trying to tell us all along. This process is the beginning of inner freedom. When the shadow no longer acts unconsciously, we are no longer its puppet. We become more fully ourselves, aware, complex, human. The shadow, when unintegrated, consumes a great portion of our psychic energy. It operates below the surface of our awareness, pulling at us through compulsions, emotional outbursts, projections, and chronic dissatisfaction. It is a silent force that exerts real influence. Every time we deny a feeling, repress an impulse, or disown a part of ourselves we deem unacceptable, we engage in a draining internal conflict. Energy must be expended to keep these parts in the dark. We tighten emotionally, physically, even spiritually, in an effort to remain unconscious of what we fear we cannot accept. The more we push down the contents of the shadow, the more power it gathers. Over time, this suppression manifests as fatigue, anxiety, irritability, and a sense of fragmentation. We find ourselves stuck in repeating loops, unable to change patterns or behaviors that seem to run independently of our conscious intentions. In this state, much of our vitality is hijacked by avoidance. When we begin the process of shadow integration, the dynamic shifts. Facing what we have long feared, denied, or ignored allows us to reclaim the energy that was once used to keep these things hidden. Integration doesn't mean that the qualities once housed in the shadow become pleasant or easy. It means they are no longer operating in exile. They are brought into the larger structure of the self, where they can be acknowledged, felt, and worked with. This process begins with awareness. We start to notice where our reactions seem excessive, where our judgments toward others are unusually intense, where we feel out of control or emotionally hijacked. These are the doorways to the shadow. Rather than dismiss these reactions or shame ourselves for having them, we pause and turn inward. We inquire not with condemnation, but with curiosity. What unmet need is behind this reaction? What fear, belief, or wound is being touched? As we do this inner work, we begin to dissolve the unconscious structures that held us in place. The feelings that once erupted destructively begin to soften in the light of attention. We learn to sit with discomfort rather than run from it. We learn to hold our fear, sadness, and anger with awareness rather than letting them possess us. And in doing so, the energy that once fueled repression is released. This reclaimed energy is not neutral. It is potent, transformative, and deeply personal. It becomes available for creative expression, authentic connection, and purposeful action. Where there was once tightness, there is now openness. Where there was defensiveness, there is now responsiveness. We find that we no longer react to life with the same level of urgency or resistance. We are not as easily thrown off center because the inner landscape is no longer ruled by hidden forces. This shift is not abstract. It is tangible, lived, embodied. The person who has begun to integrate their shadow speaks differently, moves differently, listens differently. Their energy is less erratic, more grounded. There is a sense of congruence between their words and their presence. They are not projecting unresolved material onto others as often. They are not constantly battling with their own thoughts or emotions. They are capable of holding tension without collapsing into reactivity. This creates a kind of inner spaciousness, a sense of psychological breathing room. It allows for clarity, discernment, and a deeper sense of self-trust. The energy that was once consumed by hiding, denying, and fighting against oneself becomes a source of vitality and insight. Creativity often flourishes in this reclaimed space. The shadow holds not only our wounds, but also our disowned strengths. Many people hide their power, sexuality, ambition, or intuition in the shadow because these qualities were once punished, misunderstood, or felt dangerous. When we begin to recover them, we gain access to aspects of ourselves that are essential for wholeness. The painter reconnects with rage and finds color. The writer touches sorrow and finds language. The leader embraces vulnerability and finds strength. The shadow becomes a reservoir of authentic energy, raw, real, and life-giving. Authenticity also emerges as a natural byproduct of integration. When we are no longer spending our lives performing for others or hiding from ourselves, we can show up in the world with greater honesty. We are not as invested in managing impressions because we are not as afraid of being seen. We become more consistent, more transparent, more human. This authenticity strengthens relationships and builds trust, both internally and externally. The person who has faced their shadow is often less judgmental, less reactive, and more compassionate, not because they have become perfect, but because they understand the complexity of being human. They have walked through their own darkness and therefore do not fear the darkness in others. This allows for deeper connection, intimacy, and mutual understanding. Peaceful begins to take root, not the peace that comes from avoidance or forced positivity, but the peace that comes from integration. There is a stillness that arises when the parts of the psyche are no longer at war. The inner dialogue becomes quieter, less conflicted. The person begins to trust their own responses, not because they are always right, but because they know where they come from. The sense of fragmentation gives way to a sense of inner coherence. Life may still be difficult, painful, or uncertain, but the internal foundation feels solid. There is a deeper alignment between thought, feeling, and action. Decisions become easier, not because the answers are obvious, but because the self is more united. All of this is made possible by the energy that is reclaimed from the shadow. When repression no longer requires constant psychic effort, that same effort is available for presence, connection, creation, and understanding. We stop leaking energy through denial and begin to embody it through awareness. We stop projecting our pain and begin to metabolize it. The inner world, once filled with blind spots and unspoken fears, becomes a landscape we are willing to explore. The self, once divided, begins to cohere. This transformation is not linear, nor is it final. The shadow is not a one-time confrontation, but a lifelong relationship. As we grow and evolve, new aspects of the shadow may emerge. But the difference is that we now have the tools, the awareness, and the willingness to meet them. We know the cost of repression, and we know the reward of reclamation. We no longer live at the mercy of our unconscious. We walk into the depths with eyes open, and in doing so, we find ourselves. When the shadow no longer dominates your energy, you begin to live not as a fragmented being pulled by unseen forces, but as a whole individual aligned with your inner truth. The emotions that once controlled you now inform you. The parts of yourself that once felt shameful or dangerous now stand beside you as sources of strength, creativity, and wisdom. Your energy, once consumed by suppression and resistance, flows with clarity and intention. This is not perfection, it is integration. It is a quiet, steady power of someone who has made peace with their depths and no longer fears their own reflection. To walk this path is to reclaim your life from the inside out. Good luck on your journey inward. May you have the courage to face your own depths and the grace to emerge from them whole. Thank you for listening, and may your inner work lead you not just to insight, but to transformation.